Elizabeth Lawson, was born Carolyn Smith to David and Harriet Smith. She went by the nickname Carrie and was originally from Cleveland, Tennessee. She graduated from Cleveland High School and then would go on to attend law school at the University of Alabama. She would marry Earl Lawson Jr. in 1990 and then graduate from the University of Alabama's law school and would obtain a job with a Jasper law firm. Soon after these accomplishments, at the age of 25, she was living in Jasper, Alabama with her husband. Sometime after midnight in the early morning hours of September the 11th, 1991, Carrie received a phone call from a woman claiming to be a nurse at Walker Regional Medical Center, a nearby hospital. The caller told her that her father was in the hospital, seriously injured, and she needed to come now. Carrie and Earl rushed outside to get in their Ford Explorer to go to the hospital when a masked gunman appeared. He forced them to get out of the vehicle, forced Carrie to the ground, and made her bind Earl with duct tape. The man then drove away with Carrie in her own vehicle. Earl managed to free himself, and since his keys were taken, he had to kick in the back door to get inside to call 911. After her abduction, the FBI would set up a command post inside the couple's home. Earl received a phone call the very next morning from her kidnapper demanding a $300,000 ransom for her safe return. Her loved ones gathered the money, believing Carrie would be returned to them as soon as they did. The kidnapper initially demanded Earl's father make the delivery in Coleman, Alabama, but when he showed up to the site, there were about 5 police cars there that were totally unconnected to the kidnapping case and were there purely by coincidence. But the kidnapper didn't know that and called off the drop. Her family demanded he prove she was safe and she was allowed to call. The FBI was taping the call, but the tape recorder was turned off and had malfunctioned. The next day, September 13th, another meeting was arranged and Earl delivered the $300,000 to a service station on the outskirts of Jasper. He called the payphone and told Earl he was watching him. Under the FBI's direction, Earl wore a directional beeper to let agents follow him as he made the drop. Concealed in the ransom bag was another beeper, which would allow agents to follow the kidnapper. Both beepers, however, transmitted on the same frequency, and when the drop was over, the agents who had air support unwittingly followed Earl's vehicle instead of the money. The kidnapper then made the family run around in circles from payphone to payphone and location to location until ultimately the money was dropped into a dark culvert as instructed by the kidnapper. The money was picked up on September 13th, 2 days after Carrie's abduction, but she was not released and she was never heard from again. The couple's Ford Explorer was found a week after the abduction in the woods in Winston County, Alabama. The FBI was able to identify the kidnapper's voice after releasing audio tapes as 49-year-old Jerry Bland. They then focused on Karen McPherson, a truck driver from Walker County, Alabama, and a cousin of Bland's by marriage. McPherson later pleaded guilty to the kidnapping, but said she did not know Carrie's whereabouts. She stated that Bland abducted Carrie, and McPherson herself was only an accomplice and the one that made the phone call pretending to be a nurse. She also had dropped Bland off at the Lawson's home that morning to carry out the kidnapping. McPherson said she last saw Carrie a day or two after the kidnapping and she was alive at the time. She claimed that Bland later told her that Carrie had escaped and ran into a remote wooded area. On September 28, 1991, 3 weeks after the abduction, agents searched Bland's home and located some of the money in a truck on his property matching the recorded serial numbers. They searched his home and questioned him, but didn't arrest him at that time and instead staked out the house throughout the weekend. He and his wife and their 2 daughters slept on mattresses in the living room. At some point, his wife and daughters left the home and Bland killed himself. He left a suicide note stating that most of the ransom money could be found in the attic. Indeed, $250 of the $300,000 was found in the attic. Sadly, the note did not indicate Carrie's whereabouts. Bland was once successful in coal mining and land reclamation, but had fallen on hard times and was desperate for money to fuel his cocaine habit. McPherson was later sentenced to life in prison for her role in the abduction. Carrie was apparently chosen at random by her abductors, and the sole motive for the crime was money. Her family always believed there was a third individual involved in the crime. Prior to being kidnapped, Carrie had just passed the bar exam and didn't even know it. Her family has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in the past 25 years searching for her remains. Many investigators believe her remains are buried in an abandoned coal mine between Jasper and Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Bland was a coal mining executive and had business connections in those areas. Carrie's family hired private investigator W.W. Self, known as Red, and he remained on the case until his death. In 1996, investigators hired a construction crew to pump out a pool at a closed surface mine in Tuscaloosa County. An excavator scooped out the bottom of the pool but found nothing. A month later, an anonymous tip led searchers to Lake Tuscaloosa near the Alabama 69 Bridge, about 10 miles north of Northport. In 1997, a prison inmate claimed he had first-hand knowledge of the case. Tony Lynn Dobbins said he was there when Carrie was murdered. He said he and another man guarded Carrie at an abandoned house in Marshall County, and then she was taken to Jackson County where she was killed. Dobbins led searchers to where he said her body was left, but again, the tip led nowhere. In 2000, the Smiths met with FBI agents and pleaded with them to reopen the case, but were told all leads had been exhausted. In 2002, another tip led searchers to look for her possible remains in an area of private land off Oregonia Road in North Tuscaloosa County. A search dog team from Hamburg, Germany was used for the search but found nothing. The search for Carrie continues, but her body has never been found. Over the years, there have been several extortions attempted on the Lawson family, one that led to a 15-year prison sentence for the convict. McPherson remains behind bars and has been denied parole multiple times. McPherson's family fights for parole and states that her role in the abduction was minor. Carrie's mother passed away with Alzheimer's and her father remarried. Carrie's husband Earl later moved to Birmingham and works as an attorney. He remarried and now has 3 children. As of today, Carrie has never been found and her family still seeks closure. Shameka Denise Ray was born in 1998 and was described as having a bright smile and loved to laugh. At the age of 11, she was a 6th grader at Beulah Elementary School in Beulah, Alabama, and lived with her parents, Lindsay and Eloise Frazier. On January 27, 1999 at 10 p.m., Shameka reportedly told her family goodnight and tucked herself into bed in the room she shared with her 16-year-old sister at her home in Beulah. The next morning, she was gone and her mother would report her missing. Initially, there was hope that she had just run away, but 2 days later, around 2 p.m., a school bus in neighboring Chambers County was traveling on Judge Brown Road in Valley, Alabama, when some of the children noticed something in the ditch alongside the road. The driver stopped and discovered human remains. Her father would identify Shameka by looking through the crime scene photos. The investigation into her murder determined that she had not actually been kidnapped from her home. Shameka was dressed in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, including her jacket, and there were no signs of a sexual assault. Her father, Lindsay Frazier, publicly commented to the Ledger-Inquirer, "If they had anything against me, they should have confronted me, not my child." Her father didn't elaborate on the reason for this comment, and for the past 23 years, it's been the last thing ever said publicly. This led many to speculate that he was concerned that someone possibly retaliated against him by killing his daughter. About 500 people attended her wake and funeral at the Harris Funeral Home in Opelika. Unfortunately, there are a lot of public details missing about the case, leaving some to wonder things such as if her sister was in the room the night she went missing, and did she go to bed and then sneak out of the house later? There are so many remaining questions, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Felicia Ann Weaver was referred to as Lisa by her loved ones. At the age of 52, Lisa had 3 adult sons and 4 grandchildren, but was sadly suffering from end-stage COPD. The decision was made for her to move in with her ex-husband Edward, who she was reportedly on good terms with. 2 of her adult sons were also staying there and would help care for her since she could no longer care for herself. The house where she was staying was located on Jack Cole Road in Hayden, Alabama. She was relying on supplemental oxygen to survive and could only walk about 100 feet before she needed to take a break. Her health was declining, and her family had discussed getting hospice for her. On the morning of February 5, 2015, before her son Michael left the home, he saw her sitting in bed using her iPad. While he was out, they exchanged a few text messages from 12:30 to 2:37 p.m. He then became concerned when she didn't reply to his last message and tried calling, but she didn't answer the phone. He called his father at 3 p.m. and was told the house was on fire just 23 minutes after she sent her last text message. When he arrived to the house, it was engulfed in flames, and several fire departments had responded to the scene along with several family members. They first believed she was home when the fire erupted, especially since her car was there and because she rarely left home. But after the fire was put out, authorities searched the rubble and found the remains of the family's 3 dogs, but not Lisa. There was no indication of her whereabouts, and firefighters couldn't find any human remains in the house. They don't believe she was at the house when the fire erupted. A helicopter searched the ground but didn't see anyone, although the area is very heavily wooded. Investigators are uncertain what caused the fire and could find no evidence that an accelerant was used and don't believe it was intentionally set. Lisa was a smoker and on oxygen, which is a dangerous combination, but in order for cremation to occur, the fire would have to last much longer than 23 minutes, and even then, the temperatures would not have reached those required for total cremation. Cadaver dogs were brought in as well and found nothing. 5 days after the incident, the DA said no signs of foul play were found. Strangely, over 2 weeks later, authorities said there was a person of interest. However, no further details have been released in several years, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Here's an interesting side note regarding the road that Lisa vanished from. Hayden, Alabama's Jack Cole Road has been described as one of the most haunted places in Alabama and is well known for its paranormal history, and many believe Lisa is one of its many victims. Jack Cole Road is a dirt road traveling through dense woods off Highway 7 in Blount County and is less than a half a mile long, so it's very strange that 68 people have died or disappeared under strange circumstances. Rumor has it that the tragedies began in 1890 when a hospital was built along the road, and in 1900, 60 people perished from a cholera outbreak, and many believe some of them now haunt the road. Strangely, however, there is no proof a hospital or its victims ever even existed. Witnesses have reported seeing lights in the woods and a creature resembling a werewolf or Bigfoot lurking, and even ghostly figures hiding in the trees. Hunters once stumbled upon an abandoned cabin deep in the woods containing a mummified woman, which led to locals believing she was a witch who was responsible for all the strange occurrences on the road, and the cabin was later burned down. Since the 1960s, there have been 8 mysterious deaths on the rural road and 1 missing person, Lisa Weaver. In the 60s, an unknown killer violently took the life of a local fruit grower. Then in 2003, a famous civil rights photographer was on Jack Cole Road working on a project when he began to describe seeing strange things in the woods and then inside his house. Days later, his deceased body was found in his home and his cause of death was undetermined. Then in 2015, Lisa disappeared under strange circumstances. In 2020, a large sinkhole appeared where Jack Cole Road meets the main road, and the road is now impassable. Coffee House Writers has written many stories on the subject, and several people have filmed the road and placed videos on YouTube, including Jonathan Odom. A few people still live on this road, so if you decide to go on an adventure, remember to be respectful of those residents and do not trespass on their land. Heaven LaShae Ross was born June 11, 1992. She was described as a tomboy who loved butterflies and played the trombone. At the age of 11, she was a 6th grader at Collins Riverside Middle School and lived in Northport, Alabama, and went by the name Shae. On August 19, 2003, she left her home on Hunter Creek Road about 6:55 a.m. in the Willow Brook Trailer Park in Northport, walking to the school bus stop. A neighbor reported she had seen Shae that morning at approximately 7 a.m. on Creek Road, which is the road that the bus stop is on. She said that it appeared as though Shae was making her way toward the bus stop, but she never made it on the bus. She was positively able to describe the clothing she was wearing, a hot pink Bratz shirt and leggings with baby blue tennis shoes. She was only ahead of her older sister Alex by a minute or two. Meanwhile, it began to thunder, so her stepfather Kevin said he decided to drive the girls to school so they wouldn't be in the weather. Kevin said he got to the bus stop and found Alex, but Shae was nowhere to be found. At least 3 neighbors reported seeing Shae that morning walking toward the bus stop. The woman that described her clothing, a young man walking to the bus stop, and a neighbor who was sitting at their computer near a window. Police conducted door-to-door checks on the trailer park, asking if anyone had seen anything out of the ordinary. For several weeks following her disappearance, many volunteers helped in the search for Shae and gave up as much of their free time as possible. But things got a little heated between some volunteers and Shae's family when Shae's mother, Beth, claimed that the leader of one volunteer group stole $500 that was donated by a church. However, some volunteers were accusing the family of not actively helping them search for Shae. The head of the volunteers denied the accusation, saying they had cashed all of the donated checks and handed the money directly to Beth. Meanwhile, her family fell under suspicion of involvement in Shae's disappearance. In 2000, Shae was listed as a witness when her stepfather Kevin was charged with harassment following a domestic dispute. When Shae attempted to run for help, Kevin allegedly threw her to the ground. However, Beth was adamant that Kevin and Shae had a very close bond, and both she and her husband passed lie detector tests. Beth declared that she thought the reason they fell under such scrutiny and were looked down upon was because they were an interracial couple living in a trailer park. Police announced that they had picked up 21-year-old Evan Ryland for questioning. Evan was a friend of Shae's older brother Blake and had harbored runaways in the past. He once even helped Blake hide out when he ran away from home. When police eventually tracked Evan down, he was harboring 2 16-year-old runaways. Police announced that he wasn't a suspect and just wanted to speak to him because he was somebody of interest but was soon ruled out as a suspect. By the following week, a fire occurred in Shae's family trailer and was strangely confined to her bedroom, which destroyed much of her possessions. Investigators could not determine how the fire started, but they ruled it as suspicious. For the next 3 years, her family held on to the hope that she would one day be found safe and returned to them. Tragically, 3 years later, on December 19, 2006, a man walking his dog about 8 miles from Shae's home found her remains. She was found wearing the same clothes she was wearing the morning of her disappearance. Her remains were located under an old abandoned house off Crescent Ridge Road in Holt, Alabama. The man told police that his dog had ran off and scurried into the tight crawl space of the abandoned house, which is where he discovered Shae and her backpack lying next to her. To this day, police have never revealed how they believe she was killed. Exposure to the elements made it impossible for any DNA or fingerprints to be lifted from her body. The rundown, secluded house was hard to find if you didn't know where you were going and was known as a spot where people used drugs and did other illegal activities. Prattville police at one time indicated they were investigating the possibility that the murder of Shannon Polk in 2001 could have been related to the disappearance of Shae in Northport and another girl, Teresa Dean, who vanished in 1999 from Georgia. Police said there were striking similarities in the appearance of the 3 girls. All were taken when they were 11 years old, all were white females, and all were abducted in the month of August, and all were taken from trailer parks with construction going on nearby. However, no one has ever been arrested in Shae's murder, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Tashynina Reese was born October 16, 1972, to Alan and Bertha Reese, and went by the nickname Tasha, and was raised by Mary Harris from the age of 18 months. Her birth mother, Bertha, had passed away in 1974, and Mary, who was raised with Bertha in the same home, took Tasha in as her own. Tasha was described as kind and loving, with a great heart, and also loved hugs. At the age of 16, she was in the 11th grade at Prattville High School. She lived on 6th Street in Prattville, Alabama with Mary, her grandmother, and 5 siblings. On September 1st, 1989, Tasha had told Mary she had plans to attend the local football game. She had initially come home after school while Mary was at work. However, when Tasha didn't come home after the game, Mary began to worry. When Tasha still hadn't returned by the morning, Mary called the Prattville Police Department to report her missing. Mary had no idea if someone had picked Tasha up, if she went alone, and could not give a lot of information about what Tasha may have been wearing and so forth. One rumor was that she was seen on the corner of Martin Luther King and 7th Street talking to two unknown men in a truck. However, this account has never been proven. One investigator reported that information was obtained that showed Tasha never made it to the football game. Tragically, 2 days later, her body was found near the Highway 31 bridge over the Alabama River, and her death was ruled a homicide. Sadly, Mary had to go to the river to identify Tasha's body. The last time Mary saw her alive was that Friday morning when she left to get on the school bus and kissed her and her grandmother and said she loved them. Many people were interviewed and questioned in the months after Tasha's disappearance. There are still so many unanswered questions about where Tasha went that evening and who she was with. Her family believes that someone in the community may know more details, but after all these years have not come forward. No one has ever been arrested for Tasha's murder, and as of today, this case remains unsolved.